Well, international analyst Marco Vicenzino joins me now in the studio. Well, Marco, African countries getting more aid to upgrade conditions so that people hopefully won't make the journey to Europe. Is this really plausible?
You have to look at today's events in Malta, the summit, within context. What I mean by that is that there was two meetings held. One was with the Turkish leader, and the second one was with the African leaders. The one with the Turkish leader is the most immediate impact. In other words, if you look at from Africa, you have, according to the UN, about 140,000 to 150,000 arriving this year. If you're looking at the Eastern Mediterranean, the Syrian refugees and Afghans also going via Turkey into Greece is 650,000, likely to reach 1 million this year. So if you look at it within that context, the immediate priority of Europe is to stem that flow. So in that case, they're going to probably be signing an agreement with the Turkish president by the end of November, early December, which will try to pacify the situation. They'll be working out a deal. But with Africa, that's more of a longer-term challenge because Syria is a war, refugees fleeing. From Africa, it's a combination of war, persecution, but also a lot of economic migrants. It's issues of development. So in this sense, Europe, they're looking at Africa more in longer term. So that's why many of the African leaders may not have been as satisfied with what was put on the table today.
Just watching as we speak some of the leaders in Malta there, some of the African leaders as well. They themselves say that far more fundamental changes are required, apart from just throwing billions of dollars, as it were, at it. Do they have a better solution or a better approach to this that they've come out and talked about? Classically,
you'd look at three things: aid, trade, and investment. The aid, apart from the $2 billion package that was offered today to the African heads of state, you have to look at also within the context that Europe gives about $20 billion a year in aid to Africa. Secondly, I think what the African leaders are looking at is more in terms of trade. By that, what I mean is that you have in Europe is agricultural subsidies, the common agricultural policy, whereby it protects European agriculture and doesn't play a level playing field for African agricultural products. What the African leaders want is greater access to the European market for their agricultural products. And on the investment side, there's been a lot of investment in Africa, principally if you look at the Chinese investment from India, but also from Europe. And that's something that takes time, and that's based upon opportunities of the private sector.
And on the sidelines, as part of this argument, is something that you alluded to there a couple of minutes ago. Apart from wars and conflicts, of course, it's feared climate change will set large populations in different parts of Africa on the move. So the African migration presents perhaps the longer-term problem, major problem.
Climate change is, generally speaking, internationally accepted as a threat to international security and stability. It depletes land. The environmental degradation deprives people of their livelihood. And if you look at Africa, much of the continent depends upon agriculture. And when you have those lands becoming depleted, it leaves no alternative livelihood. As a result, those people begin to migrate to areas where opportunities, where do they go? The tendency tends to be towards Europe. So yes, climate change does play a long-term role. The thing with climate change, it doesn't have an immediate impact like the war in Syria. So the public doesn't look at it in terms of it doesn't dominate headlines. It's more of a gradual approach over time, and it's not something that can be calculated immediately. You can predict, but you can't calculate immediately.
Just before we leave it, we've got another 45 seconds while we watch these pictures here of the migrants. How far is that plan with Turkey down the line right now? They're going to get £275 million, as far as I can determine, over the next 2 years. They are going to embrace it, aren't they, as a way of being accepted into the EU? It's a quid pro quo.
Three things. Basically, is the money, the $3 billion, there's a €3 billion that'll be given to stabilize and stem the flow. Secondly, it will be easing restrictions for Turks traveling into Europe, and the beginning of resuming accession talks with Turkey. Turkey's fairly walking off with a good deal, but Turkey has also had to put up with 5 years of handling. Now it possesses 2.5 million refugees in its country. So Erdogan just won the election, so he has a new mandate, he has new leverage, and he wants to use that against Europe to extract as much as he can.
Okay, Marco Vicenzino, thank you very much indeed for joining me.